I know in Newburyport, just to touch on this, we had both a Prop 2.5 override and we had a debt exemption, if I have that term correct, and both were defeated, but the debt exemption only lost by 68 votes. So I can imagine it's going to come up again, and if it is going to get stopped, it's going to get stopped by the fiscal conservatives in town. And this is why we're here. We're a fiscal conservative group. These are the type of things that we focus on. And a Prop 2.5 override is a very important subject to the taxpayers of our cities. So I felt like we should talk about that. So we have a bit of a local spin on taxes. And now Barbara Anderson's here to talk more of a state look at taxes. And Barbara, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. At least you can all tell I'm not used to sitting on a bar stool. And the reason I'm sitting is that I'm now getting very, very old. I've been fighting this battle for a long time. I am so old, Elliot, that I can remember being part of a community group fighting property taxes before Proposition 2.5. And you think you have it tough now. Let me tell you what it was like when there was no Proposition 2.5, and you went to your school committee meeting or your selectman meeting or town meeting, and you stood up and you said, the taxpayers can't afford this anymore, and they said, so what's your point? There was nothing you could do. There was no way to stop it. The property taxes went up and up, and when we were on the ballot in 1980, property taxes in Massachusetts were the highest in the world. I say that without knowing about the rest of the world a lot, simply because Massachusetts and New England and the United States use the property tax more than a lot of the other taxes like value-added taxes in Europe. So basically we had the highest property taxes in the world and nobody cared. Fortunately, we had something else that only 24 other states have, and that is the initiative petition process. So my organization, Citizens for Limited Taxation, created Proposition 2.5 and put it on the ballot. Now back then I lived in Danvers for a while, and then I was living in Marblehead, and I was calling school committee people and selectmen, and one of the school committee people who was on our side, the way you will be if you win, Gail, he said, look, you can't fight this alone. He said you have to join an organization so that you have a lot of people behind you, as you were just saying, Gail. And I said, well, I don't know any organization. He said, well, why don't you join the League of Women Voters? And I said, but the League of Women Voters, I don't agree with anything. And he said, well, join them and change them from within. And I said, I don't agree with the Communist Party, but I'm not going to join it and try to change it from within. But the fact is, though he chose the wrong vehicle, he was right. You had to be organized. You had to belong to something. And fortunately, about the time I was thinking about that, Citizens for Limited Taxation was formed in 1976, and I joined it in 1978 as a volunteer and became executive director in 1980 when Proposition 2.5 was on the ballot. I also have to laugh. You guys are talking about how you took your opponents by surprise. You stayed under the radar. Back in 1980, the initiative petition process hadn't been used much in Massachusetts, not for years. So we got our signatures. Nobody paid any attention to us. We took it to the legislature the way you have to with an initiative petition. They have to vote it up or down by the first Wednesday in May. They voted no. And we now got some more signatures. Then we had it on the ballot. And it wasn't until September of the year we were on the ballot that people started to pay attention to us. And the people paying attention to us were the entire political establishment, most of the business community, and on our side there was the High Technology Council, NFIB, small businesses, and us against the entire world. But we prevailed. We won with almost 60% of the vote. And after that, people used to refer to us as, David and Goliath. And I had to laugh at this because, well, I'm sure many of you read the Bible, but do any of you know the story of Donnie and Goliath? See, David and Goliath, as I'm sure you know, David went out, little shepherd boy. There was big Goliath, and Goliath was laughing, and all the Philistines were laughing because he was this little shepherd boy, and he had this, what did he have in his hand, this little rubbery thing with a stone? And then, of course, he used the slingshots and slayed the giant. So a few years later, the giant's brother, Goliath II, or whatever his name was, goes striding out into the battlefield, and little Donnie shows up with his slingshot. And the giant, knowing what was coming, strode across the field and stomped little Donnie into the ground. And that was the end of that technique with you. Never heard of anybody since then being killed with a slingshot in a battle in the Middle East. So we soon learned that now they knew who we were, and they knew the power of the initiative petition process, and it was never going to be that easy again. And it hasn't been. We've been fighting this battle for 30 years now. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. In 1990, we won. In 1990, we lost. In 1989, and this is history. We old timers talk about the old days a lot, but it comes around. You know, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. We're repeating it. And in 1989-90, Mike Dukakis raised the income tax, the sales tax, the gas tax, sound familiar, over those 2 years. And we put those tax cuts on the ballot. And we were on the ballot, and this was a huge battle. I mean, every time we went out to give a speech, a presentation, a debate, the public employee unions lined the roads for miles and packed the auditoriums. And our people, of course, the taxpayer citizens for their taxation were out there. But there's no way we could match the money and the power that they had. And in 1990, our opponent, who was then Jim Browdy, came up with this phrase, "It goes too far." And the voters voted against it. The first big mistake that the voters in this state made, because they sent the message that if you have enough money and enough power behind you, you can talk the voters out of doing what's in their own best interest.
Right.
And keeping the income tax, sales tax, and the gas tax. And all of those things, of course, did us no good. The pattern continued. They had a fiscal crisis followed by tax increases, followed by more spending, and they spent themselves into a fiscal crisis, and here we are again. Now, in the year 2000, we had a slightly different campaign, and as you were saying, you have to keep changing your emphasis depending upon what's going on. At that time, the income tax that had been increased temporarily in 1989, just to deal with the Dukakis fiscal crisis, they said it was temporary, and sure enough, the next year they increased it again. But 11 years later, it's still on the books. Income tax still 5.95%. They had told us it would drop to 5% in 18 months back in 1989. So this time, instead of going out there and talking about the poor taxpayers and how we couldn't afford it, we went out and talked about the broken promise. They promised it would be temporary, and they broke their promise. This is your chance to make them keep their word. And we were on the ballot in 2000. Over a 3-year period, we phased the income tax rate back to 5%. We won, and that should have been the end of it. When we won in 1980, Proposition 2.5 became law, and here it is almost 30 years later, and it's still the law, fortunately for local